A music producer recalls his connection with Charles Manson and the series of events that led to one of the most infamous mass murders in American history. He first met Manson through the Los Angeles music scene. Along with friends like Dennis Wilson of the Beach Boys and Greg Jacobson, he thought Manson had enough musical talent to warrant a recording opportunity. They planned to record high-quality demos of Manson singing and playing guitar. Their hope was to help him secure a recording contract. One day the producer visited Span Ranch where Manson and his so-called family were living. During the visit, Manson pulled him aside and told him he had killed a man named Bernard Crow. Manson believed Crow was a member of the Black Panthers. In reality, Crow was a local drug dealer not affiliated with the Black Panthers, although his appearance and mannerisms may have led Manson to think otherwise. Manson expected the Black Panthers to retaliate, which stirred paranoia and tension among the group. He asked the producer to stay at the ranch to help defend it, citing a lack of men. The producer agreed, and that decision began his downward spiral. During this period, bikers were hanging around the ranch and the producer admired them because he was working on building a motorcycle. He ended up in a bad drug deal with these bikers. A friend of his, Gary Hinman, had some encapsulated mescaline that the bikers bought. The next day they returned angry, saying the drug made them sick. They held a knife to the producer's throat and demanded their money back. Desperate, he approached Hinman for a refund. When Hinman said he no longer had the money, he offered his cars instead. Unexpectedly, Manson showed up at Hinman's house. Hinman greeted him casually, but Manson suddenly slashed his face with a knife. The producer questioned Manson, but Charlie left, leaving the mess behind. The producer tried to patch up Hinman's injuries with dental floss, but he knew taking Hinman to a hospital would result in a report to the police. He called Manson to take responsibility. Instead, Manson said he knew what needed to be done and hung up. Feeling trapped, the producer decided to kill Hinman to silence him. He stabbed him twice and Hinman died. This was done purely to protect himself from the consequences of the earlier drug deal and to avoid being exposed. After the murder, someone painted a Black Panther paw print and the phrase "political piggy" on the wall, likely to make it appear the Black Panthers were responsible. This cover-up tactic aligned with Manson's earlier fear of the Panthers, who he wrongly thought were gunning for him after the Crow incident. But this event was only the beginning. The paranoia that began with the Bernard Crow shooting expanded. Manson feared someone would betray him to the authorities. Among those he distrusted most was Tex Watson, a devoted member of the family. Watson had organized the drug deal that resulted in the Crow shooting. Manson, acting out of loyalty and impulsiveness, got involved and believed he had killed Crow. To protect himself, Manson resorted to an old prison tactic: tie others to you through shared criminal acts, making it less likely they will betray you. This manipulation was central to what followed. Manson sought to bind his followers closer through shared crimes. He directed Watson to kill a man named Terry Melcher, a music producer who once lived at 10050 Cielo Drive and had snubbed Manson's music ambitions. Manson was unaware that Melcher had moved. When Watson asked what to do if others were there, Manson told him to kill anyone present. This ignorance and cold directive led to the murder of 5 people, including actress Sharon Tate, who was living at the property with her husband Roman Polanski. The story of these murders would later be sensationalized by prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi. He argued in court that Manson's motive was to start a race war he called Helter Skelter. This was a theory built on Manson's bizarre rants and apocalyptic beliefs. However, according to those close to the events, including the narrator of this story, this was not the real motive. The murders were about control, fear, and covering up previous crimes. Manson wanted his followers to become complicit so that they would be less likely to inform on him. Bugliosi allegedly knew the truth but spun a more dramatic story for personal gain. He was already collaborating with a writer during the trial and turned the case into a best-selling book and movie deal, securing his legacy and fortune. Charles Manson in various interviews denied being a mastermind. He said that others had control over the young women in his group long before he met them. He blamed their parents, schools, television, and society for shaping them. He admitted he had influence over people, as anyone does, but denied directly telling them to kill. Manson refused responsibility for their actions, insisting he was being scapegoated for society's failures. The final commentary in the retelling addresses the public's fascination with the story. People are drawn to the myth of Manson as a dark genius, a cult leader who manipulated his followers with supernatural charisma. But the truth, according to those involved, is far less romantic and much more grim. Manson was not a mastermind but a paranoid man driven by ego, fear, and desperation. His actions were fueled by a series of misjudgments and escalating attempts to maintain control. He was not a revolutionary or a prophet, just a man whose influence and insecurities led to a chain of tragic events. The story also highlights how easily a narrative can be reshaped by those with something to gain. Bugliosi's helter-skelter theory became the dominant version of the events largely because it fit the public's appetite for a grand, horrifying tale of madness and murder. But those who were actually involved insist that the truth was simpler. Manson, fearing betrayal, pulled others into violence to protect himself. Tex Watson and others followed orders out of loyalty or fear. The killings were not about race war or changing the world, but about avoiding jail and silencing threats. The tragedy is that several people died as a result of a few men's fear and ego. The murders at Cielo Drive were not part of a grand plot but a consequence of misunderstanding, miscommunication, and manipulation. In the end, the producer concludes that people want the story to be more complex than it really is. They prefer the fantasy of evil masterminds to the truth of pathetic men making deadly mistakes. People don't want to hear that Manson was a mess of delusion and fear that the family was less a cult than a group of lost souls being led by a manipulative coward. It's easier for society to believe in monsters than in ordinary people making monstrous decisions. The narrative closes with a note of frustration. Despite the truth being less dramatic, it is much harder to get people to believe it. The myth of Manson continues to overshadow the truth. The truth is ugly and mundane. It's about failure, paranoia, exploitation, and the horrifying lengths people will go to in order to save themselves. The story continues to resonate because it touches on deeper issues within American culture: celebrity obsession, counterculture, disillusionment, and the power of myth over truth. At its heart, the Manson saga is not just about a group of brutal murders. It's about how easily reality can be warped when people are desperate for meaning in chaos. Charles Manson wasn't a brilliant manipulator or a revolutionary thinker. He was a petty criminal, a failed musician, and a narcissist who used fear and charisma to gain control over people who were already lost and searching for direction. The people who followed Manson were often young, damaged, and disillusioned. Many came from broken homes or lives filled with neglect. The late 1960s offered them a vision of peace, love, and rebellion against traditional authority, but the idealism of that era quickly curdled into something darker. Manson offered answers: spiritual, communal, rebellious, but only on the surface. Underneath, his family was a fragile structure built on drugs, violence, and psychological manipulation. It wasn't about love or unity. It was about domination and fear. Tex Watson's transformation from an ordinary young man into a cold-blooded killer was not the result of some magic spell. It was the outcome of months of conditioning, drug abuse, and the need to belong. Manson encouraged his followers to break social norms, to forget their past lives, and embrace a new identity. But what he truly demanded was obedience and the erasure of individual will. When he told Watson to kill, he did it because that was the final test of loyalty. Not because he believed in a race war or a new world order, but because he had been broken down and reshaped in Manson's image. The justice system failed in many ways. Rather than uncover the simple but ugly truth, it wrapped the story in myth. The helter-skelter theory was easier to sell to the public. It had drama, spectacle, and horror. It allowed the legal system to present itself as the force of reason defeating an apocalyptic cult. But in choosing that narrative, it ignored the real factors: manipulation, fear, criminal self-preservation, and created a legend that would eclipse the truth for decades. In the end, the murders were not about ideology. They were about ego, desperation, and the tragic consequences of unchecked paranoia. That is the uncomfortable reality behind the myth. If you enjoy watching this video, then subscribe to Angel Recaps for the latest movies explanation.